What I thought I would do is I actually made I kind of laid this out into a few different areas. So as a violinist, I've had personal experiences of discrimination I have some examples in my private teaching studio, some orchestral auditions, and I also just remembered the one when I was accepted at the university and I went to meet the dean with my parents. So I think I'm just going to start with that one. So I was enrolled, and we had arrived at the university for one of those final visits, and I remember the dean saying, "Okay, everything is all set. Now, of course, you may opt to not even finish university. You might just get married and leave us." And I said, "No, I won't. I'm planning to go all the way through. I may get married someday, but I'm not planning on leaving the university." So I think the main point was he thought that I might give up for whatever reason, and I was determined not to give up. So that was shocking. And then something later on, maybe 5 to 10 years later, this is the late 1980s, in my private studio while I was teaching, I had a student, and the student was moving along just fine. And then one fine day, the student's mother comes up to me and says, "We want her to study with a man. We feel like she'll progress better. It would be much better for her." And this was the same mother who was telling me that I was pushing her daughter too hard, the music was too hard, that I had assigned her and all of this. So the same thing happened again a few years later, probably the late 1990s, and I was teaching for a school, and the director of the school came up to me, and again, the student had been with me for almost a year. She came up to me and said the family decided they wanted to study with a man. So, and I think this has happened still a third time. I was away for a long period of time, and so about a month or so I was going to be away out of the country. So I actually spoke with a colleague of mine who happened to be male, and when he took the student, they were thrilled to have their little boy study with a man because he would get, probably get more done than they thought. So those were at least 3 instances where I was actually told by the mothers that they preferred that their child study with a man. So it was a woman telling me this. So that hurts when we kind of can't, kind of help each other out a little bit. I think it's depending on what the reasons were. Maybe there was just a different way that the mom, could have phrased it. Anyone could have phrased what they needed to tell me. But anyway, that was the reason that they gave. So I have some examples then of an orchestral audition that I took. And again, it was like the late 1980s. It was customary at that time, I'll get into that more later, but this particular audition was not behind a screen. Nowadays, they do the bulk of auditions, which are like job interviews for musicians. We don't talk to anybody. There's no spoken words. You walk in, you play. But further back, they used to have you come in, and they would be able to just see you. So I played this particular piece, and it's heavy, it's demanding, it's a thick, rich sounding piece. And so he stopped me and said, "I see that you're playing in some orchestras that play a lot of classical and earlier music that has perhaps a lighter touch on the bow, or you're playing very lightly, I feel, for this piece." So he said, "What are you going to do if I put you next to a really big band in an orchestra? Are you going to be able to play this piece because it's heavy music?" And I said, "Yes, I can do that. Let me play it for you again." And of course, at that point, he refused to hear me again. So it was like, the buzzer goes off and you're out of the game. So I was offended by that, and I wish in hindsight I had said something more to him, rather than just saying, "I can do this, let me play it for you again." Maybe I should have said even something a little bit more, just to make him understand violin has nothing to do with size. As long as everything's lined up with the physics of it, someone my size can play just as loud as someone 6'3". It really has nothing to do with how tall you are or anything. And he should have known that. So that was disappointing, I thought. So then, what I thought I would do next now in this presentation is talk a little bit about areas that I found that I don't have maybe direct experience with, but there are women composers and women conductors that are just grossly underrepresented in the US, in Europe, probably globally. So if you have the handout that I brought, you'll see this list of female conductors that are in capital letters, and there are about 7 of them out of the 29 that I picked. I was just brainstorming off the top of my head some of the most, the best in terms of funding. They have the largest financial base, and they're also just outstanding orchestras, you know, in the world, and Europe and Canada. So, and you'll notice that one of the greatest things is the Baltimore Symphony, which is really considered in the U.S. to be one of the top 10 orchestras, has a woman conducting it, Maren Alsop, and she's fantastic. And then Buffalo also has Joanne Folletta, and she's been around conducting for well over probably 30, 35 years. And if you notice down at the bottom, the Pennsylvania Ballet Orchestra, I thought that was really neat when I was researching this, that she has been there since 1997 conducting their orchestra. So that was great. And our own New Jersey Symphony has a woman now, just as of, I think, last year. So that's really exciting. So then when you look at females taking auditions, if you look at this, the Harvard Kennedy School, when they did a study on this, they found that in the 70s through the 90s, this is a little bit old. This is from maybe 2014. This came out, but they examined the time period they examined was from the 70s to the 90s, and you can just see that when they took a look at what was going on in the 1950s, the New York Philharmonic had 0 women in it. In 1967, they had no women, 103 men, 103 white men playing the orchestra. That was it. And so they began in the late 70s to start using this concept of the blind audition. So they had the screen up, and they also put carpeting on the floor, so you can't tell if it's a woman walking out there or not. One of the women in another article here said that when she auditioned on trumpet for the St. Louis Symphony, she actually was coached and told that a woman's breathing before coming in would sound different than a man, so be very careful that she didn't make any noises back there. So what ends up happening is really a cool thing now is that they literally run the entire audition, if they're really doing it the right way, the entire audition, all 3 rounds, so the prelims, the second round, and the finals are all behind a screen. Nobody sees anything. There's carpeting on the floor. You can't hear anybody walking. And then the musician comes out at the end when they've won the job. So that's really the most fair way to do it. And so it's really good that orchestras, basically, I think around the world. Again, I don't have 100% data on that. I don't know for sure, but it's very, very common practice, and certainly in the U.S. it is common practice because it's all done through the union, the Musicians Union, the American Federation of Musicians. It's part of the AFL-CIO. It actually protects musicians in terms of everything from any kind of arbitration, anything they need to take up with the management in their orchestra. If they're having any kind of discrimination situation, they can take it to the union, and the union will actually handle that for them. So they watch out for temperature in the room for us, making sure it's not too cold for the instruments or the people. They make sure we don't have to play too long. We have breaks. You play for 50 minutes, you have 10 minutes off. So they really look out for the welfare of musicians. So that's been a big part to it, improving the lives of the symphony player and not exploiting them. So you're welcome to go through that article. There's a lot more in here, but the final findings for that audition records were collected from 8 major symphony orchestras to do that, and the sample audition size was 7,000 individuals, and they had rounds through all the auditions numbering like 14,000 person rounds and 580 total auditions. So in that, they found that it basically raised the number of women in the orchestras by about 30% when they started using those screens, using that system. So it's a fair way to do things. So the other area I wanted to target was, this is another article that I gave you, right, from The Guardian, that it talks about female composers. And so we saw how few conductors there are, and another area that's really small in number are the number of women, actually the composers' pieces they get put on concerts. And they're starting to have these programs now whereas in a symphony season they will say we're going to have a concert of women composers, or we're going to feature, a female composer on every concert or something like that. But oftentimes it ends up being like a 3 to 5 minute short piece just to kind of, check off the box. So we're looking to still improve that area too, to have actual, full symphonies that are 30, 40 minutes long, just like so many of the male compositions. So this is a very recent article. This came out in June of this summer. And the figures compiled in this study show that a total of 3,524 musical works will be performed in this concert season. And out of those, 3,442, 97.6% are by men, and only 2.3% are written by women. So it is really, really small. There's a huge discrepancy there. And it amounts to about 95% of all concerts having music only composed by men on them. So, and you can skim through here. There were a lot of interesting things, and it's quite shocking. They mentioned the BBC Proms, which is it's a big festival in London, and that particular program only, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, had a woman conducted for the first time, the final concert, and that was Maren Alsop from Baltimore. So she got to go and do that. So that was really neat. So a couple of other things that I wanted to hit on. There is a young composer who's fantastic, Caroline Shaw. You might want to look out for her music. She's with a group called A Room Full of Teeth. They do a lot of interesting stuff. And we've had women composers dating back to, the 11th century. I mean, they go all throughout time. But a living composer now too is Joan Tower. Thea Musgrave has written a lot of wonderful music, and you don't see them. Amy Beach you see on programs sometimes, but not that often. And we have tons of new composers that are writing things all the time. There's really good stuff. Her last name is Schneider. She is in Princeton on faculty there, and she has written some wonderful things that the Princeton Symphony has played. And so, look out for those names if you find concerts with women composers on them. So, things are getting better. I guess I can just wrap up that talking about equal pay, symphony orchestras have been pretty good in that department. I wouldn't really complain about that because it's based on seating. So if you're a section leader, if you're a principal, meaning that you're sitting in the first chair of that section of violins that's maybe 20 people, deep, you'll be paid more than the rest of the section. It will be a large increase on top of what the other people are getting because you've had to, really stand out. And that goes for all the sections. So in the symphony, you've got 2 sections of violins, you've got viola, cello, bass. You could have harp, and the first harp would be paid more than the second harp, but that's just a matter of due course. That's because that person sometimes does have more responsibility. They will have solos. They will have greater exposure. So that's why that is in place, and that has nothing to do with a gender bias. That will just be whatever your contract is with the symphony management. And then I talked a bit about the union and how that really protects musicians. So I think in terms of just talking a little bit about some difficulties that I've had, I guess it would be, a few times if there's been something really unfair said, like the audition instance or something like that. And then I would also say navigating the politics, because in terms of auditions, making it so fair, what used to happen in orchestras, and still does happen to an extent if you freelance, your contractors, and they begin to like musicians that they've worked with before perhaps, or maybe you have a certain sound, and so you will get hired for that reason. So that's not entirely fair, but sometimes in the freelance world, you're not always dealing with an audition situation. You might be hired to play a smaller event or something like that, or to add in to an orchestra if they have some missing people that week or something. So sometimes, navigating those politics can be difficult, and you do, you do miss out on stuff sometimes. Your buddies will get called for something, and I didn't get called for that, So that happens. It still can exist, and sometimes getting connected with really good contractors that really tend to schedule and book a lot of really good work is sometimes hard. So that's one of the drawbacks, I guess. As far as personal triumphs or just the things that I enjoy in my work, I really enjoy being able to work wherever I've moved. So I moved in Los Angeles, I moved to New Jersey with absolutely no connections. And in those days there was no internet, so there was a big giant manual called the Musician's Guide or something like that. It was some kind of almost like a telephone book full of all these orchestras, and I had to just go through there and look up things that were local, get numbers, and go meet people and audition. But it worked. It was just the primitive version, so it was not the internet. And it has been fun. It's been fun to go. I lived in India for a while, and I was able to meet lots of musicians and really wonderful students. That was just a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun there. And in I guess looking back when I was younger or anything from my childhood, I wasn't really aware of discrimination. Played a lot of auditions as a young person and went through a lot of different orchestras. It was very competitive. We were always kind of vying and fighting for those top seats, but it wasn't, I probably didn't see the signs of anything was there, but probably the first one that hit me was that college, and it wasn't even an interview. I had already decided to go there, and the dean said that to me. So that was the one thing I would say that would stick out when I was fairly young. I guess I was 18. So anyway, but I think that wraps it up. So thank you.